In this segment, we're going to cover the ensiling phases, talk through what happens inside a silo, and then using some of those concepts, troubleshooting the fermentation and the ensiling, and looking at three basic things really: water, air, and dirt. So to start with, we're going to go through the phases of ensiling. So what you're looking at is a graphical representation of the processes that happen inside a silo. And it can be any kind of silo. It can be an ag bag, it can be baleage, it can be a tower silo, a drive-over pile, a bunk silo. This all happens in all those different structures. And so we'll start at the beginning, and that's over here on the left. And what we're looking at are three different things. We're looking at the oxygen level, the pH, and the temperature. So in the beginning, the whole reason we chop forages for ensiling is to break apart the cell wall and expose the sugar, because the sugar is going to get converted to the acid that lowers the pH and preserves the crop. But in the beginning, there's a lot of oxygen present. So if we have sugar exposed to oxygen, we're going to get something bad happening, and that's combustion. Carbon dioxide, heat, and water are the end products of sugar being consumed by aerobic bacteria, aerobic cells in general. So the plant itself are going to do this as well. So as our oxygen level is high, we're going to get an increase in temperature. pH is not going to go down through this whole process. So our goal here is to get the oxygen out of the system as quickly as you can. And that's to keep this heat from being created. Now the heat is pretty important, because if any place in this silage there's a temperature of about 142 degrees for more than 2 or 3 days, we get something that's called bound protein. And we measure that in our forage lab. We measured it as ADICP, acid detergent insoluble crude protein, basically bound protein. Now obviously that's not good because we're binding protein, but it's also an indication that we've had a lot of loss of energy. A lot of room and fuel has been spent here in just creating heat, and that's a waste. So we want to limit that as much as possible. Again, our pH is not going down, so we need to get through here and get the pH to come down. So this is where packing and permeability and silage density all come into play. So the sooner we can get this oxygen out, the better. The other thing that's happening here when the oxygen level's high is that mold and yeast that are naturally present in the environment are going to continue to feed off the sugar. And if this takes too long, too many days in any one part of the silo for this oxygen to get eliminated, that mold and yeast will switch from a vegetative phase to a reproductive phase, and they produce spores. And those spores will spring to life on the back end, and when we're exposing it to oxygen again. So if we have unstable silage at feed out, generally it's because it took too long to get through this first phase. So we get the oxygen out, then the good things can start to happen. Here we have an S-curve. Things are going slow, and then they take off, and then they die off. This green line is the bacteria growth, silage bacteria growth. These are the bacteria that convert the sugar to the silage acids. And there's two different types. And they're really at war with each other to dominate this pile of silage. One produces lactic acid, the other produces acetic acid. We want lactic acid because lactic acid's 10 times stronger in its pH reduction ability than acetic acid. So that means there's going to be 10 times more sugar left, and sugar is a room and fuel, than if it was done by acetic acid. So we can affect how this war between microbes comes out by affecting the environment. One way here is oxygen. So this lactic acid bacteria, the good guys, have to have absolutely no oxygen here. The bad guys, let's call them, the acetic acid producing bacteria, they can grow with a little bit of air present. They're facultative. So we can affect this by getting the oxygen out rapidly and completely. We're going to have more lactic acid bacteria. Another way is that the lactic acid bacteria prefer it dry. The acetic acid producing bacteria like it wet. So our dry matter and ensiling are going to determine which bacteria class wins the war. The third way is going to be with dirt. So these acetic acid bacteria are soil-borne bacteria. So if we get a lot of dirt, mud, dust, manure into the silage mass coming into the silo, we're basically inoculating it with the bad guy bacteria. So we don't want to do that. So three basic things, air, water, and dirt, are going to determine who wins this war for the sugar and comes out in the end. So let's say we did a good job. We've got 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1 ratio of lactic to acetic bacteria. We're going to produce acid. Our pH is going to come down. As soon as the oxygen was out of here, our temperature started coming down. Eventually, the pH is going to get to the point where it kills off the bacteria that are producing it. It's a self-limiting process, and they're going to die off. And then what we have here at the back end is we need to keep oxygen out. We don't want to let oxygen in before the cow gets it. So that's going to be affected by our feed-out rate, our face disturbance of defacing, and all that, determine that. So how do we affect who wins the war and how much room and fuel we're going to get out of this process? Air, dirt, and water are going to have a lot to do with it. But in the beginning, we've got to do the packing. We've got to consider the permeability of the silage. And the dry matter is going to help determine that to get that oxygen out fast. And then we have to have the right environment in terms of dry matter, keep the dirt out, and get that oxygen out fast to get the lactic to acetic ratio around 3-to-1. And then keep the oxygen out by feeding it out rapidly enough and not disturbing that phase, keeping the covers on, etc. So that's the ensiling phases and how we can affect room and fuel in the process. So let's use room and fuel as a measure and see how that goes. Also, that's where this room and fuel concept can be converted easily to an economic impact. Because pride is one thing, a percent of the room and fuel that the cow is going to require coming from forage is nice, but if you can put it in dollars and cents, that's even nicer. So what we'll do is go through some forage OBS graphs, and just the ones that describe water, dirt, and air. And when I say water, it's going to be dry matter. When I say dirt, it's going to be the ash level. And when I say air, it's going to be acid, detergent, and soluble crude protein, that measure of bound protein that happens when the temperature spikes up there. So those are the three things that we can look at. The outcome is going to be lactic to acetic ratio. We want to have 3-to-1, 4-to-1's okay, 2-to-1's okay, but anything less than that means acetic acid 1. Anything more than that, we're going to wind up with too much lactic acid, not enough acetic, because some acetic is good. It's a great mold inhibitor. It keeps things from heating up. So we want some acetic acid there. Sugar as an indication of what happened. Sugar is the most readily available nutrient that bad bacteria and bad mold and yeast can get, and obviously what the cow requires. So it's a great indicator if we had respiration losses or fermentation losses, or the silage heated up on feed-out. On the other side, room and fuel. What we're shooting for, what we're trying to maximize is little dNdF. This is the digestible fiber as a percentage of the whole plant. You get that by multiplying the percent of the plant that's cell wall, or NDF, and then the digestibility of that cell wall. So really it's a battle between cell wall thickness and cell wall digestibility. If you get too thin a cell walls and have real high digestibility, this number may not be as high as you want it to be. Conversely, if our cell wall is very thick but not very digestible, it cannot be what we want. It's got to be the right balance. Rumen residual MSC is our pectin beta glucan. That's the cell wall lining that we saw in the picture in the previous segment. And then the sugar that's inside the cell wall. And then the starch, the rumen digestible starch, is going to produce lactose, and that's going to give us our milk flow. So these produce the solids, the protein and the fat. This is a result that really determines what the flow of milk is going to be. So to kind of make this real, I want to tell a story of two farms and look at their haylage quality over time in forage OBS grass. And the way that I've done this with several groups of farms is that we get a bunch of the farms together in one meeting in the winter time. This one happened to be 5 large dairy farms that are in northern New York, right on the Canadian border. And we do this meeting once a year with everybody that's involved. That runs all the equipment, the managers, the owners, the feeders. We get the lenders in there. We get the insurance people, and we get a lot of people into these meetings. The most rumen fuel for forage is what the farm wants in order to be the winner. What I've done here is just broken out 2 of the 5 farms and looked at their haylage results. So the 2 farms, we'll call them G and S. Both are 3,000 cow operations that feed about 55% forages, and like I said, they're located up north in northern New York. About 2/3 to 3/4 of their forage is going to be corn silage or BMR. About 25-35% is going to be a mixed, mostly grass type of hay crop silage. Very little hay or straw in these diets. They're both making about 5.5 to a little over 6 pounds of fat and protein components. That's per cow per day at around 11%, 10.5 to 11% component efficiency. And that's basically how much dry matter intake it took to make the pounds of components. So 10% component efficiency would mean that a 55-pound dry matter intake resulted in 5.5 pounds of fat and protein. Our haylage feeding rate to lactating cows is going to be small compared to some other areas of the country, only about 6 to 10 pounds. So these are predominantly corn silage or BMR mixed diets. So let's take a look. What we have here first is going to describe the water part of it. So these 2 farms, this one is looking at, this first graph is looking at kind of a way to look at their haylage. So their haylage is going to be described by calcium level. This tells me if it was legume, it would be high up here on the graph. If it were grass, it would be low. So this is mixed mostly grass, and this level here of calcium. And the reason I break that out is because the dry matter window is different. If you're legume, you need to be a little bit drier because it's a more buffered product with the calcium and with the protein being made. So you need to have it a little bit drier to get the pH to come down. But if you're grass, you can be a little bit wetter. So 30 to 40, 10 points, 30 to 40% dry matter is my goal for grass silage, and 35 to 45 for haylage. So right away you can see these 2 farms, G and S, produce haylage that's almost identical in terms of its calcium level, but G is much more drier than S. So these 2 farms have the same basic resources, same equipment, same type of workforce, and this is just a difference in the way they manage their crops. The one on the right is also looking at water, but now over time, and that's how these other graphs will be set up. So these are when the samples actually came out and were fed, and so according to the date on the bottom, and then the level of dry matter level is going to be here on the left. The trend line is for each individual farm, and here's my 30 to 40% window of where I want to see dry matter for these farms to be. As you can see, G is much drier than S, and S has actually gotten a little bit wetter over time. In the window, a little bit above the window, but that's basically what they've done over time. So that's the water side of things. So from what we described earlier in the silo is that we would expect the wetter stuff to have more acetic acid and burn up more sugar in the process. Here's our ash levels. So in grass type of silage, mixed mostly grass, anything above 10% ash is probably going to be a contaminant. Below that, you're probably going to be the mineral content. But the lower you go, the better the outcome is going to be in terms of this. So there's obviously some contaminant, even if we're in the 8 to 9 range, 9 to 10 range. You can see these two farms, this is a 5-year period. We've been working with these farms to lower their ash content over time because it's costing them, and each of them have, but they're at different levels. This one is much lower, G is much lower, S is a bit higher. That's the dirt part of it. The air part is going to be this ADICP number we talked about. This is the heat and the time that we're exposing this silage to more than 140 degrees. It's going to bind the protein, show up as this number. So I'm using this number basically as a proxy for how good a job they're doing at excluding air from the silage mass. This can be in the windrow. It can be as we're building these bunk silos and not covering them as quickly as maybe we should, not packing them well. Haylage is very difficult to spread out and get compacted. It balls up in front of the loader, so that makes it difficult. And then also on the feed outside, if we're disturbing the face, that air exposure is going to cause some heat to come in and cause this number to be higher as well. Again, consistently, G is lower than S, but you can see they're both making improvements over time, just like they were on the ash side of things. They're making improvements because we've been talking to them about this, and they want to win this little contest of who has the most room and fuel. S has made actually very good progress. They've done some pretty aggressive things to try to limit this part of it. So you get a picture of where we've been, or what we have. We have G drier, G cleaner in terms of contamination, and G more air exclusion, at least until recently, than S. Again, same resources, but different management emphasis on this haylage program. So what are the results? This is the sweet spot that I referred to earlier. So the things that we're going to look 2 rumen fuels at once here. We're going to look at digestible fiber, and we're going to look at sugar levels. So sugar levels above 3 and digestible fibers, little d-NDF, above 20 give us the sweet spot. And you can see who dominated here. It was G. S only had 1, 2 out of there. It was so low percentage. So that's where they fell and the reasons they fell there. So how does that pan out? So we have the sweet spot versus Farm A. We're jumping now into a different set of farms. This is actually one farm from Quebec that I was sent, and this is their results. So what we have here are the farm that was sent, and then what would be sweet spot, to hit the sweet spot on corn silage and on haylage. So as I compare those and look at what their contributions are, you can see that they're going to be a higher percent of rumen fuel coming from the sweet spot versus coming from the farm itself. You can actually place a value on the forage based on the pounds of rumen fuel that are preserved there. And so I've done that, and it's basically, in this case, about 15 cents per pound of rumen fuel, and by doing that, their value is going to be $8 less than if they hit the sweet spot, and $5 less on the haylage side. If we bring that out in terms of how much they're feeding of haylage and corn silage, haylage here, corn silage there, you can say that they need to replace that rumen fuel, and it's more expensive, about twice as expensive to replace it versus coming from the forage, it's going to cost this farm, because they're not in the sweet spot, about 44 cents per cow per day. And I'll show you how we got there a little bit. So here's the farm A, the sweet spot, and what the difference is, and what the difference is there, we're winding up with. Basically, this small farm, 75 cow farm, is spending $12,000 more than they would if they would hit the sweet spot. So we can put an economic value to hitting the sweet spot. Again, the room and fuel value is about 15 cents per pound of dry matter, and I get there by looking at their ability to produce milk in terms of component efficiency, what their milk is worth in terms of component production, and any premiums, deductions, PPDs, etc. And that is going to determine what that room and fuel value is. It's a proportion to that. Then to replace it, if I'm giving the whole diet cost and I've got these forages valued through that, I can back into what the purchase grain side of things are going to cost. And then knowing what has to be supplied in terms of room and fuel from the forage and not from the forage, you can determine how much more room and fuel from concentrate is going to cost. In this case, it's 2.2 times more. So this 44 cents basically is what it's going to cost them to buy room and fuel from concentrates in order to meet the cow's requirement. So that's a look at a lot. The ensiling phases, we went through that, and then how we can affect the room and fuel that results from the forages just through managing the ensiling side of things, and then what the economic impact is going to be.